The bullet missed Maggie Kearns by 3 inches, embedding itself in the wooden post behind her. But she laughed anyway because the startled horse beside her had knocked the shooter's hat clean off his head in panic. That was how Jacob Calhoun first heard the sound that would change his life forever on that dusty morning in Kennewick, Washington Territory, in the summer of 1883. Maggie stood there in the chaos of the town square, her auburn hair escaping from its pins, her traveling dress covered in trail dust, laughing with such genuine abandon that several people turned to stare even as others scattered for cover. The shooter, a drunken ranch hand named Pete who had been aiming at tin cans behind the saloon, stood slack-jawed at what had nearly happened. Jacob had been loading supplies onto his wagon outside the general store when the shot rang out. He dropped the sack of flour he was carrying and ran toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. What he found was not a gunfight or a robbery, but a young woman doubled over with laughter while the local deputy wrestled the rifle away from Pete. "Madam, are you hurt?" Jacob asked, reaching her side in 3 long strides. His heart was still pounding from the fear of what he might find. She straightened, wiping tears from her eyes, her laughter finally subsiding into breathless giggles. "No, no, I am quite all right. Did you see his face? And the poor horse?" She gestured at the still skittish animal tied to the hitching post. Jacob stared at her. Most people would have been terrified, crying, or angry. This woman was laughing. "You nearly got shot." "But I did not," she said, her smile bright enough to rival the August sun. "Nearly only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, as my father used to say." Jacob found himself smiling despite the situation. "Your father sounds like a wise man." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "He was. He passed last winter." "I am sorry for your loss, madam." The deputy, having secured Pete and handed him off to another man to be locked up for the night, approached them. "Miss, I am terribly sorry about that. Pete gets foolish when he drinks. You sure you are all right? That was awful close." "I am fine, truly," Maggie assured him. "Though I suspect poor Pete might need a new hat." She pointed to where the horse had trampled the worn felt hat into the mud. The deputy shook his head in amazement and walked away muttering about city women and fool luck. "You are not from around here," Jacob observed. It was not a question. "Is it that obvious?" Maggie asked, brushing at the dust on her skirt. "I arrived on the morning stage from Portland. I am here to take a teaching position at the school." "You are the new teacher." Jacob's surprise was evident. The town had been expecting a teacher, but the last letter had indicated a Mr. M. Kearns would be arriving. "The school board thought you were a man." Maggie's laugh rang out again, and Jacob felt something shift in his chest. "Yes. Well, I find that using my initial rather than my full name gets me further in applications. By the time they discover their mistake, it is usually too late to refuse me the position without looking foolish." "That is clever," Jacob said, finding himself genuinely impressed. "That is necessary," Maggie corrected, but her tone held no bitterness, only practicality. "A woman must work twice as hard for half the respect in this world." Jacob could not argue with that. He had seen his own mother struggle after his father died, trying to keep their small ranch running. "I am Jacob Calhoun. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. My younger sister Emma will be in your class. She is 13 and bright as a new penny." "It is lovely to meet you, Mr. Calhoun," Maggie said, extending her hand properly. "I look forward to meeting Emma." Jacob took her hand, noting the ink stains on her fingers and the firm confidence of her handshake. "Let me help you with your luggage. Do you know where you are staying?" The school board mentioned a boarding house run by a Mrs. Patterson, Martha Patterson. "Good woman." "Her place is just down the street." Jacob looked around. "Where are your things?" Still at the stage office, I assume. I wanted to walk around and get my bearings before settling in. That is when the excitement happened. As they walked back toward the stage office, Maggie took in everything around her with bright, curious eyes. Kennewick was not a large town, but it was growing. The railroad had reached nearby Wallula, and people were pouring into the Washington Territory, hoping to make their fortunes in wheat farming and cattle ranching. The town had 2 saloons, a general store, a church, a newly built schoolhouse, a small hotel, the boarding house, and a handful of other businesses lining the main street. "It is beautiful here," Maggie said, looking out at the rolling hills beyond the town. "Different from Portland, but beautiful in its own way. It gets hot in summer, cold in winter, and dusty all year round," Jacob said. "But yes, I think it is beautiful too. The land here is good. Hard, but good. It gives back what you put into it if you are willing to work." They reached the stage office, and Jacob helped load her 2 trunks and 1 large carpet bag onto a borrowed handcart. As they walked toward the boarding house, Maggie asked him about the town, the people, the school, and life in the territory. Jacob found himself answering more fully than he usually did. He was not typically a talkative man, preferring to keep his thoughts to himself, but something about Maggie's genuine interest and the musical quality of her voice made him want to share. Martha Patterson greeted them at the boarding house door, a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair and a warm smile. "You must be Miss Kearns. We have been expecting you. Oh my, is that your luggage? Jacob Calhoun, you are a gentleman for helping. Come in, come in." Jacob carried the trunks upstairs to the small but clean room that would be Maggie's home. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk, and a window overlooking the street. Simple but adequate. "This is perfect," Maggie said, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. "Thank you both so much." "Supper is at 6, Martha said. "We have 3 other boarders right now. The banker, Mr. Hollies, the surveyor, Mr. Chen, and Miss Sarah, who works at the general store. All respectable folks. Breakfast is at 7, and I expect rooms kept tidy and no visitors after 8 in the evening." "Of course," Maggie agreed. Martha bustled back out, leaving Jacob and Maggie standing somewhat awkwardly in the small room. Jacob realized he should go, but found himself reluctant to leave. "Thank you again, Mr. Calhoun," Maggie said. "You have been very kind to a stranger." "Jacob, please," he said. "And you are welcome. If you need anything, the general store is run by Tom and Louise Harper. They know everyone and everything in this town. They can help you get settled." "Jacob," Maggie repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "I hope we will see each other again. I come to town most Saturdays for supplies," he heard himself say. "And Emma will start school in 2 weeks when the term begins." After Jacob left, Maggie sat on the edge of her bed and took a deep breath. The room was stuffy from the summer heat, so she opened the window to let in fresh air. Below, she could see Jacob climbing onto his now loaded wagon. He glanced up, perhaps sensing her gaze, and touched the brim of his hat in farewell. She waved back, feeling an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You are here to teach, to build a life for yourself, not to moon over the first handsome cowboy you meet." But she had to admit he was handsome. Tall, with broad shoulders built from hard work, sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of sage. His brown hair needed a trim, and his clothes were worn but clean. He had strong hands and a quiet confidence about him that she found appealing. More than that, though, he had looked at her like she was a person, not just a woman to be managed or dismissed. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. Maggie spent her time preparing the schoolhouse, meeting the families whose children would be in her class, and learning the rhythms of the small town. Kennewick was different from Portland in almost every way. Smaller, dustier, more isolated. but there was a sense of community here that she had not expected. People looked out for one another, helped when needed, and welcomed her more warmly than she had anticipated. She met the school board, a group of 5 men who were initially taken aback by her gender but quickly won over by her credentials. She had graduated from a teacher training college in Boston, had taught for 2 years in Portland, and came with glowing references. The fact that she was willing to come to a remote Washington Territory town, when most teachers preferred cities, made her valuable regardless of her gender. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building painted white, with benches for students of varying ages and a wood stove for winter heating. Maggie spent hours organizing her materials, planning lessons, and making the space welcoming. She brought in wildflowers for the windowsills and drew educational posters for the walls. On Saturday morning, she was at the schoolhouse arranging books when she heard footsteps on the porch. She turned to find Jacob standing in the doorway with a young girl beside him. "Good morning," she said, genuinely pleased to see him. She had thought about him more than she cared to admit over the past weeks. "Morning, Miss Kearns," Jacob said. "This is my sister Emma." "Emma, this is your new teacher." Emma Calhoun was 13, with long dark hair in braids and the same sage-colored eyes as her brother. She looked at Maggie with cautious curiosity. "Hello, Miss Kearns. Please call me Miss Maggie when it is just us," Maggie said, coming forward. "I am so glad to meet you, Emma. Your brother has told me you are an excellent student." Emma's eyes widened. "He did?" "I said you were bright," Jacob corrected, but his tone was affectionate, "which you are when you apply yourself." "What do you like to study?" Maggie asked Emma. "I like reading best," Emma said, losing some of her shyness. "We only have a few books at home, but I have read them all multiple times. And I like mathematics too, though it is harder for me." "Well, we have quite a few books here, and I brought some of my own to share. And I promise to make mathematics as interesting as I can." Maggie smiled at the girl's obvious enthusiasm. They talked for several minutes about what Emma could expect from school. Jacob stood quietly, watching them interact. When Emma went outside to examine the flowers Maggie had planted by the steps, Jacob lingered. "She likes you," he said. "Emma can be reserved with new people, but you put her at ease. She seems like a wonderful girl." "She is. Losing our parents was hard on her. Our mother died when Emma was born, and our father passed 3 years ago. I have been trying to be both brother and parent, but I am not always sure I am doing it right." Maggie heard the concern in his voice. "From what I can see, you are doing wonderfully. She is polite, curious, and clearly cared for. That speaks volumes about how you have raised her." Something in Jacob's expression softened. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "Are you managing the ranch alone then?" Maggie asked. "I have 2 ranch hands who help, and Emma does more than she probably should. We run cattle mostly, some horses. It is not a big operation, but it is ours. My father built it from nothing, and I intend to honor that." "That is admirable," Maggie said, and meant it. They stood there for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the schoolhouse windows, creating a warm, golden glow. Maggie was acutely aware of how close Jacob was standing, how she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I should let you get back to your preparations," Jacob said finally. "But if you would like, Emma and I would be happy to show you around the area sometime. There are some beautiful spots along the river, and you should know the land if you are going to teach here." "I would like that very much," Maggie said. After they left, Maggie found herself humming as she worked, a smile playing at her lips. She was being foolish, she knew, but she could not help it. There was something about Jacob Calhoun that drew her in, some combination of strength and gentleness that appealed to her deeply. The first day of school arrived with a crisp September morning. Maggie wore her best dress, her hair pinned up neatly, and arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early to make sure everything was perfect. By 8 o'clock, children began arriving with their parents. She had 17 students ranging from age 6 to 15, including Emma. Maggie greeted each family, learning names and faces. Most of the parents were farmers or ranch hands, their hands rough from work, their faces weathered by sun and wind. They looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism and hope, wondering if this young woman from the city could really teach their children what they needed to know. "Children," Maggie said once everyone was settled on the benches, "welcome to a new school year. My name is Miss Kearns, though you may call me Miss Maggie. I am here because I love teaching, and because I believe that education is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. In this room, we will learn reading, writing, mathematics, history, geography, and science. But more than that, we will learn to think, to question, and to grow." She paused, looking at each eager or nervous face. "I have 3 rules. 1. Treat others as you wish to be treated. 2. Always try your best, even when something is difficult. 3. Never be afraid to ask questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question, only questions we have not yet answered." The first day went better than Maggie had dared hope. The children were well behaved, eager to learn, and diverse in their abilities. She had her work cut out for her managing so many different ages and skill levels in one room, but she had trained for this and was ready for the challenge. At lunch, the children ate outside and Emma approached Maggie's desk. "Miss Maggie, I just wanted to say thank you. This morning was the most interesting school has ever been." "Why, thank you, Emma. That is high praise indeed. Our last teacher just had us copy from books all day. He never explained anything or made it interesting." "Well, I promise to do my best to keep things engaging. Learning should be an adventure, not a chore." Over the following weeks, Maggie fell into a routine. She taught 5 days a week, prepared lessons in the evenings, and spent her weekends exploring the area, getting to know people and occasionally seeing Jacob when he came to town. Each time she saw him, that same flutter returned to her stomach. They would talk, sometimes for just a few minutes, sometimes for an hour or more, finding excuses to prolong their conversations. One Saturday in late September, Jacob invited her to ride out to his ranch for Sunday supper. "Emma would love to show you around, and I make a decent roast beef," he said, his hat in his hands, suddenly looking younger and less certain than usual. "I would be delighted," Maggie said, her heart beating faster. Sunday afternoon found her riding in Jacob's wagon out toward his ranch, the landscape rolling past in shades of gold and brown. The summer heat had given way to autumn coolness, and the air smelled of dry grass and sage. "Emma has been talking about this all week," Jacob said as they drove. "She made me clean the house twice." Maggie laughed, that bright, unrestrained laugh that made Jacob's hands tighten on the reins. "I laughed too loudly," Maggie said suddenly, self-consciously. "People always tell me I should be more demure, more ladylike. I have tried, but I cannot seem to help it." Jacob glanced at her, his expression serious. "It is my favorite sound on earth," he said quietly. Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You are just saying that." "No," Jacob said, meeting her eyes. "I mean it. When I heard you laugh that first day, even with everything chaotic around us, I thought it was the most honest, joyful sound I had ever heard. Like sunlight made into music. Do not ever change that." Maggie did not know what to say. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Most men found her laughter too loud, too unrefined. She had been scolded by her mother, by previous suitors, by society women who said a lady should only laugh gently behind her hand. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice softer than usual. "That is perhaps the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, both acutely aware of the significance of what had just passed between them. The Calhoun ranch was modest, but well-maintained. The main house was a simple two-story wooden structure, painted white with green shutters. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and fields stretching into the distance where cattle grazed. Emma came running out when they arrived, her face bright with excitement. "Miss Maggie, come see the new foal. She was born last week and she is beautiful." Maggie let herself be pulled toward the barn, charmed by Emma's enthusiasm. The foal was indeed beautiful, all long legs and soft eyes, staying close to her mother's side. "What is her name?" Maggie asked. "I have been calling her Starlight because she has a white mark on her forehead shaped like a star," Emma explained. "That is a perfect name." They spent the afternoon touring the ranch, Emma chattering constantly while Jacob watched them both with an expression Maggie could not quite read. The two ranch hands, Mike and Tom, tipped their hats politely when introduced, but otherwise kept their distance, giving the family their privacy. Supper was indeed roast beef, along with potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie. They ate at a scarred wooden table in the kitchen, the evening light slanting through the windows. "This is delicious," Maggie said sincerely. "You undersold your cooking skills, Jacob." "He is a good cook," Emma agreed. "He had to learn after Pa died. At first everything was burned or raw, but he got better." "Emma," Jacob said, but he was smiling. "What? It is true. Remember the chicken incident. We agreed never to speak of the chicken incident." Maggie laughed again, delighted by their easy affection for each other. This was what a family should feel like, she thought, warm and safe and full of small joys. After supper, Emma insisted on showing Maggie her room and her small collection of treasures, things that had belonged to their mother. A hand mirror, a cameo brooch, a Bible with notes in the margins. Maggie listened as Emma talked about the mother she had never known, how Jacob had told her stories about what their mother was like, kept her memory alive. "Jacob is the best brother anyone could have," Emma said seriously. "I know it has been hard for him, taking care of me and the ranch. He never complains, but I see how tired he gets sometimes. I wish he would let himself be happy." "What do you mean?" Maggie asked gently. "He never does anything just for himself. Everything is about the ranch or about me. A few ladies in town have shown interest in him, but he always makes excuses. I think he is worried about bringing someone new into our lives, someone who might not want me around." Maggie felt a pang in her chest. "Emma, any woman would be lucky to have you in her life. You are smart and kind and wonderful. If your brother found someone who did not appreciate you, then she would not deserve him." Emma looked at her hopefully. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." When darkness fell, Jacob insisted on driving Maggie back to town despite her protests that she did not want to trouble him. "It is no trouble," he said firmly. "The roads are not safe at night for a woman alone." Emma hugged Maggie goodbye, making her promise to come back soon. As they drove back to Kennewick under a sky full of stars, Jacob and Maggie talked quietly about everything and nothing. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by comfortable silences. "Emma is right, you know," Maggie said at one point. "You are a wonderful brother. What you have done for her, raising her alone, it is remarkable." "I just did what needed doing," Jacob said. "She is my sister. I love her. Not every man would have stepped up the way you did. Some would have sent her to an orphanage or to distant relatives. That was never a possibility. She is my family, my responsibility. More than that, she is the best part of my life." He paused. "Though recently I have found myself thinking that there might be room for more good things." Maggie's breath caught. "Oh, Maggie," Jacob said, then stopped. They had reached the edge of town, and he pulled the wagon to a halt near the boarding house. He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. "I am not a man who is good with words. I am better with actions, with hard work, but I need to say this. Since the day I met you, since I heard you laugh in the face of danger, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. You are smart and kind and brave, and you make Emma happy, and you make me feel things I have not felt in years, maybe ever." Maggie's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Jacob, I know it has only been a few weeks. I know you came here to teach, to build your own life. I am not trying to rush you or pressure you. I just needed you to know. I care about you, Maggie Kearns. I care about you a great deal." "I care about you too," Maggie said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have tried not to. I have told myself to be practical, to focus on my work. But every time I see you, I find myself hoping you will stay longer, that we will have more time to talk. You are a good man, Jacob. The best man I have met." Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm against hers. "May I court you properly, come calling, take you to church socials, let people know my intentions are serious?" "Yes," Maggie said, tears pricking her eyes, though she could not have said if they were from happiness or the overwhelming rightness of the moment. "Yes, I would like that very much." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender that it made her breath catch. "Then I will do my best to be worthy of you." "You already are," she whispered. The courtship that followed was the talk of Kennewick. Jacob came to town every Sunday to escort Maggie to church, and they would walk together afterward, talking and laughing. He took her to the harvest social in October, where they danced to fiddle music in the community hall. He brought her wildflowers, books he thought she might like, small gifts he had carved from wood with his own hands. Maggie met his friends and fellow ranchers. She learned about cattle and horses, about the challenges of working the land, about the politics and economics that shaped their lives. Jacob, in turn, came to her school occasionally, fixing things that needed repair, bringing supplies, listening to her talk about her students and her lessons with genuine interest. They stole moments when they could, brief touches of hands, long looks across crowded rooms, conversations that stretched into hours. Jacob was respectful of Maggie's reputation, never pushing for more than she was comfortable with, but the attraction between them was undeniable. One evening in November, as frost began to touch the morning grass, Jacob invited Maggie for a sunset ride. They traveled to a high point overlooking the Columbia River, the water reflecting the orange and pink sky like liquid fire. Jacob spread a blanket and they sat together, shoulders touching, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I built my father's ranch," Jacob said quietly. "But I always thought someday I would build my own house, something new. I have been saving money, planning. There is a piece of land about a mile from the current ranch house, on a rise with a view of the river. I always thought that would be a good place for a home." Maggie listened, sensing the importance of what he was saying. "I used to think I would build it alone, for just me and Emma. But now when I imagine it, I see something different. I see a bigger house with room to grow. I see a garden, maybe children playing. I see a life that is fuller than I let myself dream about before." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "Maggie, I know we have only known each other a few months. By some people's standards, that is too soon. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your laugh and your mind and your courage. I love how you care about Emma, how you care about your students, how you see the best in people. I love who I am when I am with you." Maggie felt tears sliding down her cheeks as Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "The only thing my father brought with him when he came west. He gave it to my mother, and she gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone I loved with my whole heart." "Maggie Kearns, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Maggie said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." Jacob slipped the ring on her finger, and then he kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Maggie felt like her heart might burst from the joy of it. When they finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Maggie said. "Just by being exactly who you are." They sat there as the sun finished setting and the stars began to emerge, planning their future. They would marry in the spring, after the school year ended. Maggie would continue teaching, at least for a while, because she loved it and they could use the income. They would build the new house together, making it a true home. Emma was thrilled when they told her the next day, throwing her arms around Maggie and calling her sister already. Winter came to the Washington Territory, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Jacob came to town less frequently because of weather and ranch work, but he wrote letters that Maggie treasured, full of details about his days and dreams for their future. She wrote back just as faithfully, telling him about her students, her lessons, the small events of town life. On Christmas, Jacob and Emma came to town for the church service and community dinner. Jacob gave Maggie a beautiful leather-bound journal, "For recording our life together," he said. Emma gave her a scarf she had knitted herself, the stitches uneven but made with love. The winter months tested their commitment but ultimately strengthened it. They missed each other fiercely, counted the days until they could be together again. When Jacob did make it to town, their reunions were full of joy, their conversations picking up as if no time had passed. In late February, a blizzard struck, one of the worst in years. The town was cut off, no one could travel, and everyone hunkered down to wait it out. Maggie worried about Jacob and Emma, knowing they were dealing with the same storm but unable to contact them. She spent 3 anxious days before the weather finally cleared. The morning after the storm, she was at the boarding house helping Martha cook for the other boarders when someone pounded on the door. Martha opened it to find Jacob standing there, covered in snow, his face haggard. "Jacob." Maggie ran to him. "What happened? Are you all right? Is Emma?" "Emma is fine. She is with the neighbors," Jacob said, his voice rough. "I had to see you. I had to know you were safe. The storm was so bad, and I could not stop thinking about you being here alone. And what if something happened? And I never got to tell you how much I love you one more time. And I know I am not making sense, but I had to come." He was rambling, clearly exhausted, and Maggie pulled him inside. "I am fine. I am safe. Come sit down. Martha, can we get some hot coffee?" Jacob let himself be led to a chair, and Maggie knelt in front of him, taking his cold hands in hers. "You rode through that storm to check on me." "I waited as long as I could," Jacob admitted. "But I could not stand it anymore. I had to know." "You could have been killed," Maggie said, torn between being touched and angry. "I know. I am sorry. I just needed to see you." Martha brought coffee and food, clucking over Jacob like a mother hen. After he had warmed up and eaten, Maggie made him tell her everything about how they had weathered the storm at the ranch. They had lost a few cattle, but the house and barns had held strong. Emma and the ranch hands were fine, though worried about Jacob's impulsive decision to ride to town. "I need to get back before dark," Jacob said eventually, "but I had to see you first." "I understand," Maggie said, "but please promise me you will never take such a risk again. I could not bear it if something happened to you." "I promise," Jacob said, then smiled. though I think we have established that we are both a little reckless when it comes to each other." Maggie could not argue with that. As winter gave way to spring, the whole town began preparing for the wedding. It would be held in the church on the first Saturday in May, with a reception at the community hall. Maggie worked with Martha and the other women to prepare, making her dress, planning the food, organizing everything. Emma was to be her bridesmaid, and Jacob asked Mike, his senior ranch hand, to stand up with him. The weeks before the wedding were a blur of activity. Maggie finished the school year, saying emotional goodbyes to her students. Several families asked her to return in the fall, and after discussing it with Jacob, she agreed. They would need the income while building their new house, and she loved teaching. Jacob and his ranch hands had already begun work on the new house, laying the foundation and framing the walls. It would be simple at first, just 4 rooms, but built with the intention of adding on as their family grew. The night before the wedding, Maggie lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house for the last time. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Boston to Portland to this small Washington Territory town. She thought about the bullet that had missed her, the laugh that had started everything, the quiet cowboy who had become the center of her world. Tomorrow she would become Maggie Calhoun. Tomorrow she would start a new life. She was nervous but certain. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. The church was filled with wildflowers and people. It seemed like the entire town had turned out. Maggie wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and sleeves, her hair arranged in soft curls. Martha had helped her dress, tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said. "Jacob is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Maggie replied. When the time came, she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Chen, the surveyor from the boarding house who had kindly agreed to give her away. But she only had eyes for Jacob, standing at the front of the church in his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes full of love and wonder as he watched her approach. The ceremony was traditional, the words familiar, but when Jacob said, "I do," his voice was strong and certain. When Maggie said the same, she meant it with her entire heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Jacob did, tenderly, while the church erupted in applause and cheers. Maggie laughed against his lips, that bright, unrestrained laugh, and felt his smile in response. The reception was a joyful affair with food and music and dancing. Jacob danced with Maggie, with Emma, with Martha and the other women who had helped. Maggie danced until her feet hurt, laughing the whole time. As the sun began to set, Jacob and Maggie slipped away in his wagon, heading toward the ranch. Their ranch now, Maggie thought with a thrill. Emma was staying with neighbors for the night, giving them privacy. The house was not finished yet, so they would live in the old ranch house for a few more months. But Jacob had cleaned and prepared it, filling it with flowers, making it special. He carried Maggie over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calhoun," he said softly. "I love the sound of that," Maggie replied. "Mrs. Calhoun, Maggie Calhoun, your wife." That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other in the intimate darkness, expressing with touches and kisses what words could not fully capture. It was tender and passionate and sometimes awkward, but always full of love. Afterward, Maggie lay in Jacob's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I did not know I could be this happy," she whispered. Jacob kissed the top of her head. "Neither did I." "You have given me a gift, Maggie, not just your love, but the permission to want more from life, to dream bigger. I was just existing before you came. Now I am living." The summer that followed was one of hard work and deep contentment. Jacob and his ranch hands worked on the new house. Maggie helped when she could, and Emma was with them constantly, full of energy and excitement about their growing family. The house took shape slowly, but surely. They built it with their own hands, making decisions together about every detail. In the evenings, after work was done, they would sit on the porch of the old ranch house and watch the sunset. Jacob would hold Maggie's hand and they would talk about their day, their plans, their dreams. Sometimes Emma would join them. Other times she would give them space, understanding that they needed time alone. Maggie continued teaching when the school year started again in the fall. Now she made the trip from the ranch to town and back each day, sometimes with Jacob, sometimes on her own. The ride gave her time to think, to prepare lessons, to transition between her two worlds. In October, Maggie realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be sure, then told Jacob one evening as they sat by the fire. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Jacob's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, and settling finally on wonder. "Truly, I believe so. It is early yet, but the signs are there." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby, our baby." "Maggie, I am terrified and thrilled, and I do not know what to do with all these feelings." Maggie laughed. Of course she did. "I feel exactly the same way." Emma was delighted when they told her, already planning how she would help with the baby, what they would teach it, how she would be the best aunt in the world. The news spread through the community, and women who had experience with childbirth offered advice and help. The winter passed more gently than the previous one. Jacob was even more attentive than usual, worried about Maggie's health, insisting she rest more, not work too hard. She tolerated his hovering because she knew it came from love, though she also had to remind him regularly that pregnancy was not an illness. By spring, her belly was round and obvious. She had to stop teaching in March, the ride to town becoming too uncomfortable. She spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes, arranging the nursery they had built into the new house, which was now complete and beautiful. They moved into the new house in April, on a warm day with a gentle breeze. It smelled of fresh wood and paint, and every corner was full of promise. Their bedroom had large windows overlooking the river. The nursery was painted a soft yellow. The kitchen was spacious and practical. There was a room for Emma, a parlor, and space to add more rooms as they grew. "It is perfect," Maggie said, walking through each room with wonder. "You built this for us." "We built it," Jacob corrected. "This is ours together." The baby came in late May after a long, difficult labor that left Jacob pacing and worried outside while Martha and the doctor helped Maggie. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the room despite Martha's protests. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right?" "You have a son," Martha said, smiling. "A healthy, strong son." Jacob approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. Maggie lay there exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Meet your son," she said. Jacob took the baby in his arms, hardly daring to breathe. He was so small, so perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and tiny hands that gripped Jacob's finger with surprising strength. "Hello," Jacob whispered. "Hello, little one, I am your father, and I promise I will do everything I can to be worthy of you." They named him James after Jacob's father. James Robert Calhoun, born on May 23, 1885, 7 pounds and healthy. Emma was besotted with her nephew immediately, wanting to hold him constantly, helping Maggie with everything. The first weeks were challenging as they adjusted to having a newborn. James was a good baby, but any baby requires constant care. Jacob helped as much as he could, walking with James when he cried at night, changing diapers, anything to ease Maggie's burden. "I have never been so tired," Maggie admitted one morning after a particularly rough night. "I have never been so happy," Jacob replied, and it was true. As the months passed, James grew and thrived. He had Jacob's eyes and Maggie's smile. He laughed often, especially when Maggie laughed, as if he had inherited her joy. The sound of their laughter together, mother and son, made Jacob's heart feel too big for his chest. Life fell into a rhythm. The ranch prospered, with cattle prices good and their herd growing. Maggie's garden flourished, providing vegetables for the table and flowers for the house. Emma excelled in school, showing particular aptitude for mathematics. James reached each milestone, rolling over, sitting up, crawling, walking. When James was a year old, Maggie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the process was familiar, less frightening. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Maggie's mother but called Molly to avoid confusion, arrived in the spring of 1887. She was smaller than James had been, with auburn hair like Maggie's and a fierce determination evident from her first days. "She knows what she wants," Maggie said, nursing the infant, "and she will not be denied." Just like her mother, Jacob teased, Emma was now 16 and growing into a remarkable young woman. She had several suitors, though she claimed to be too busy with school and helping with the children to be interested. Jacob suspected she was more interested than she let on, particularly in the new teacher who had taken over when Maggie stopped working, a young man named David Morrison. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. James started school, where he proved to be bright and curious like his mother. Molly grew into a spirited toddler who kept everyone on their toes. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to expand the house further, add more cattle, hire another ranch hand. In 1889, Washington became a state, and the whole territory celebrated. Jacob and Maggie took the children to town for the festivities, James at 6 years old and Molly at 2. They watched fireworks and listened to speeches, and felt pride in being part of something larger than themselves. Emma married David Morrison that same year, in a wedding as lovely as Maggie and Jacob's had been. Maggie cried watching Emma walk down the aisle, remembering the shy 13-year-old she had first met. David was a good man, patient and kind, who clearly adored Emma. They settled on a small farm about 10 miles away, close enough to visit regularly. That fall, Maggie discovered she was pregnant once more. At 33, she worried more about this pregnancy than the previous ones, but everything progressed well. In early spring of 1890, she gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and Henry. The birth was difficult, and the doctor warned her that another pregnancy would be dangerous. Jacob, terrified of losing her, readily agreed that their family was complete, with 5 children now, including Emma. Though she had her own home, the house was always full of noise and activity. Jacob added more rooms, making space for everyone. The ranch had grown substantially, and they now employed 4 ranch hands full-time. Mike had become the foreman, a trusted friend and partner in running the operation. Maggie did not return to teaching formally, though she often tutored children who needed extra help. Her days were full with managing the household, raising the children, helping on the ranch when needed. It was exhausting and fulfilling, everything she had never known she wanted. One evening, when James was 11, Molly was 8, and the twins were 5, the family sat around the dinner table sharing stories of their day. James talked about a book he was reading. Molly described a bird she had seen. The twins were arguing good-naturedly about who had found the biggest rock. Emma and David were visiting, Emma now pregnant with their first child. Maggie looked around the table at these people she loved, this life she had built, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Something must have shown on her face because Jacob reached over and squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "I am thinking about the day we met," Maggie said. "The bullet, the chaos, how I laughed, how you looked at me like I was remarkable instead of strange." "You are remarkable," Jacob said, "though also strange sometimes in the best possible way." Maggie laughed, that same bright, unrestrained laugh that had caught Jacob's attention 12 years earlier. The children laughed with her, even though they did not know the joke, simply responding to their mother's joy. "It is still my favorite sound on earth," Jacob said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What is?" James asked. "Your mother's laugh," Jacob explained. "The first day I met her, she laughed in a way that changed my entire life. It was the most honest, joyful sound I had ever heard." "Mama does laugh a lot," Molly observed, "louder than other mamas." "That is because I have so much to laugh about," Maggie said, looking at each of them in turn. "I have all of you." As the years continued to pass, the Calhoun family became a fixture in the community. Jacob served on the town council. Maggie organized a lending library and taught Sunday school. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. James wanted to be a lawyer, spending hours reading books about law and justice. Molly loved animals and was a natural horsewoman, riding better than most grown men by the time she was 12. Thomas and Henry were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, getting into and out of trouble as a unit. Emma and David had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and the cousins grew up playing together, forming bonds that would last their lifetimes. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the larger operations in the area. Jacob's reputation as an honest, hard-working man was unassailable, but it was not all easy. There were years when drought threatened the cattle, when prices dropped, when money was tight. James broke his arm falling from a tree when he was 13, and the fear Maggie felt waiting to hear if he would be all right nearly broke her. Molly went through a rebellious period at 15, angry at the restrictions placed on her as a young woman. The twins, usually inseparable, had a falling out over a girl when they were 17, not speaking for months until Maggie and Jacob intervened through it all. Jacob and Maggie's love remained constant, a foundation they could build everything else upon. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching sunsets, holding hands, talking about their day. They still stole moments when they could, kisses in the barn, embraces in the kitchen when the children were not looking. They still made each other laugh, still found joy in the small, everyday moments of their shared life. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905, Jacob arranged for the children to stay with Emma so he and Maggie could have a night alone. He took her back to the overlook where he had proposed, where the Columbia River spread out below them reflecting the sunset. 20 years, Maggie said, leaning against him. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time." "I would live them all again," Jacob said. "Every moment, good and bad, because they brought me here with you." "We have built a good life," Maggie said, "better than I ever dreamed possible." "We are not done yet," Jacob replied. "We have grandchildren to spoil and children to see married and years ahead of us still." He was right. James married at 25, a lawyer now as he had dreamed, marrying a fellow lawyer named Sarah who argued cases as passionately as he did. Molly married at 23 to a rancher who appreciated her knowledge and skill with horses, who treated her as a partner rather than a subordinate. Thomas and Henry both married at 27, on the same day in a double wedding that had everyone laughing and crying. Each wedding, each grandchild born, was a celebration. The family tree grew and branched, spreading across Washington and beyond. But no matter how far they went, the children and grandchildren always came back to the ranch, to the house Jacob had built, to the place where it all started. Jacob was 60 when his health began to fail. It started small, a cough that would not go away, fatigue that rest could not cure. The doctor called it weak lungs, probably from years of harsh weather and hard work. He prescribed rest, but Jacob was not good at resting. He still rode out to check on cattle, still fixed fences, still refused to slow down. Maggie watched him with growing concern, trying to get him to take better care of himself. "You are not 20 anymore," she would scold. "Let Mike and the others handle things." "I am fine," Jacob would insist, but they both knew he was not. The decline was gradual but steady. By the time Jacob was 62, he could no longer ride, could barely walk from the house to the barn without stopping to catch his breath. It frustrated him terribly, this weakness, this betrayal of his body. One evening, as they sat on their porch in the summer of 1911, Jacob turned to Maggie with serious eyes. "I am dying," he said bluntly. "We both know it." Maggie wanted to protest, to deny it, but she could not lie to him. "Yes," she whispered. "I am not afraid of dying," Jacob continued. "I have lived a good life, a full life. I have you, I have our children, I have more blessings than any man deserves. But I am afraid of leaving you." "Do not," Maggie said, tears streaming down her face. "Do not leave me." Jacob took her hand, his grip weak but his touch still familiar, still beloved. "I will fight as long as I can. But when the time comes, I need you to promise me something, anything. Promise me you will keep living. Really living, not just existing. Keep laughing that laugh I love so much. Keep finding joy. Keep being the remarkable woman you have always been. Do not let my death diminish your light." "I do not know if I can," Maggie admitted. "You can," Jacob said with certainty. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. You laughed in the face of danger the day we met. You can face anything." Jacob lasted another 6 months. The family gathered, taking turns sitting with him, sharing memories, expressing love. In his final days, he was often confused, but he always knew Maggie. She rarely left his side, holding his hand, reading to him, telling him about their life together, on a cold December morning with snow falling outside and Maggie beside him. Jacob Calhoun took his last breath. He was 63 years old and had been married to Maggie for 26 years. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Jacob had touched many lives, been respected and loved by so many. Maggie stood at the graveside, flanked by her children, and watched as they lowered his coffin into the ground. She did not cry, not then. She felt frozen, numb, unable to quite believe that he was really gone. It was later, alone in their bedroom, surrounded by his things, that she finally broke. She sobbed until she had no tears left, holding his pillow, breathing in his fading scent, aching with the loss of him. The weeks after were dark. Maggie moved through her days mechanically, doing what needed to be done but feeling nothing. Her children worried about her. Emma moved back to the ranch temporarily, trying to help, but even she could not reach the deep grief that had settled over her mother. It was James, surprisingly, who broke through. He came one evening and found Maggie sitting in Jacob's chair by the fire, staring at nothing. "Mama," he said gently, "he made you promise." Maggie looked up at him blankly. "Papa, before he died. He made you promise to keep living, to keep laughing. I heard him. We all heard him at various times. He made us all promise to make sure you did." "I cannot," Maggie whispered. "Without him, I do not know how." "Then learn again," James said, kneeling beside her chair. "For him, for us, for yourself. You taught me that joy is a choice, that we can find light even in dark times. Practice what you taught." It was hard, the hardest thing Maggie had ever done. But slowly, day by day, she began to come back to herself. She started by going through the motions. making herself smile even when she did not feel like it, forcing herself to engage with her children and grandchildren. Gradually, the smiles became more genuine. She found herself occasionally chuckling at something one of the twins said. Then one day, one of her grandchildren did something so absurdly funny that she laughed, really laughed, that bright sound Jacob had loved. She felt guilty immediately, as if she had betrayed his memory by finding joy without him. But then she remembered his words, his plea for her to keep living. He had not wanted her grief to consume her. He had wanted her to be happy. From that moment, healing truly began. Maggie would always miss Jacob, would always carry the ache of his absence. But she learned to live with it, to honor his memory by living the way he had asked her to. She became the matriarch of their growing family, the center that held everyone together. She attended every grandchild's birth, every wedding, every important moment. She told stories about Jacob, keeping his memory alive for the grandchildren who had never known him, or had only known him when they were very young. The ranch continued under Mike's management, with James overseeing the business side. The house remained in the family, and Maggie stayed there, refusing offers from her children to move in with them. "This is my home," she said firmly. "Your father built it for us. I will not leave it." She lived another 23 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81 in 1934. She was surrounded by 3 generations of her family, a testament to the life she and Jacob had built together. The day of her funeral, her granddaughter Clara, Molly's eldest, told a story. "When I was little," Clara said, "I asked Grandma Maggie what the secret to a happy life was. She thought for a long moment, then said this: 'Love deeply, laugh freely, and never apologize for either.' She said Grandpa Jacob taught her that he heard her laugh one day and told her it was his favorite sound on earth. She said that taught her that the things we might see as flaws, others might see as beautiful, and that the greatest gift we can give anyone is to love them exactly as they are." Clara paused, tears in her eyes. Grandma and Grandpa loved each other exactly as they were, and that love created all of us. Everything we have, we owe to them and to that love. Maggie was buried beside Jacob on a hillside overlooking the river. Their headstones were simple: Jacob Calhoun, beloved husband and father, 1848 to 1911. Maggie Calhoun, beloved wife and mother, 1853 to 1934. Together forever, but their legacy lived on. The ranch remained in the family for generations. The house, expanded and updated but still fundamentally the same structure Jacob had built, became a gathering place. Every summer, the family held a reunion there, dozens of descendants coming from across the country to celebrate their heritage. And always, at these reunions, someone would tell the story of how it all began, how a young teacher had almost been shot and laughed instead of screaming, how a quiet cowboy had heard that laugh and recognized the sound of his future, how they had built a life together on hard work, deep love, and the courage to find joy even in difficult times. The story became legend in the family, passed down through generations. Young couples would stand at the overlook where Jacob had proposed, making their own promises. Children would play in the house Jacob built, running through rooms filled with the echoes of laughter. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the hills, you could almost hear it, bright and unrestrained and full of joy. The sound that had started it all. The sound Jacob Calhoun had called his favorite on earth. The sound of Maggie's laughter, ringing through the years, a reminder that love and joy can endure any hardship, outlast any sorrow, and echo across generations. The Calhoun family flourished, growing and spreading, but always remembering where they came from. They remembered the courage it took to build a life in a hard land. They remembered that love is not just a feeling but a choice made every day. They remembered that laughter, honest and free, is one of life's greatest gifts. And in remembering, they honored Jacob and Maggie, the cowboy and the teacher who had found each other against all odds and had built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. They had created not just a family, but a legacy of love, laughter, and the enduring human spirit's capacity for joy. The ranch still stands, over a century after Jacob first broke ground. The house, carefully preserved, has been placed on the historical register, recognized as significant to the state's history. Tourists can visit and walk through the rooms where the Calhoun family lived, see the view from the porch where Jacob and Maggie spent so many evenings together, stand at the overlook where he proposed. But more than that, the story lives on. It is told to children at bedtime, to young people making choices about their own lives, to anyone who needs a reminder that real love exists, that it is worth fighting for, that it can transform everything. "I laughed too loudly," Maggie had said on that first day, insecure about something others had criticized. "It is my favorite sound on earth," Jacob had replied and meant it with his whole heart. In that exchange was everything they would become to each other. Acceptance, admiration, love. The recognition that what the world sees as imperfection is often what makes us most perfectly ourselves. The understanding that the right person will love us not despite our quirks, but because of them. Their story was not unusual in its components. Boy meets girl. They fall in love. They build a life. They face hardships. They find joy. They grow old. They die. It is the universal story of human love, repeated countless times across history. But it was unique in its specifics, in the particular way Jacob and Maggie loved each other, in the family they created, in the values they passed down. It was unique because all love stories are unique, even while sharing universal themes. The particular combination of these two people, their personalities and dreams and choices, created something that had never existed before and would never exist again in quite the same way. That is the beauty and tragedy of being human. Every connection we make is singular, irreplaceable. Every love story is its own universe. And when we lose people, we lose not just them but the particular version of ourselves that existed in relation to them. But the flip side is equally true. The love we create ripples outward in ways we cannot imagine. Jacob and Maggie's decision to build a life together created not just their immediate family but generations of descendants, each carrying forward something of their legacy. The students Maggie taught went on to teach others. The people Jacob helped went on to help others. The love they shared inspired others to seek and nurture their own love. No life is too small to matter. No love is too ordinary to change the world. Jacob and Maggie were not famous or powerful in the traditional sense. They were a rancher and a teacher in a small Washington town. But they lived with intention, loved deeply, raised their children well, and contributed to their community. And in doing so, they created ripples that spread far beyond what they could have known. Their great-great-grandchildren walk the earth today, carrying their genes, living out their own stories. Some are teachers, honoring Maggie's legacy. Some work the land, honoring Jacob's. Some have moved far from Washington, pursuing opportunities Jacob and Maggie could not have imagined. But all of them carry something of their ancestors, whether they know the full story or not. This is how we live forever, not through grand gestures or historical fame, but through the lives we touch, the love we give, the values we pass down. Jacob and Maggie understood this instinctively. They did not try to be extraordinary. They simply tried to live well, love deeply, and find joy wherever they could. And in the end, perhaps that is the most extraordinary thing of all. To live an ordinary life extraordinarily well, to find beauty in simple moments, to laugh freely, to love without reservation, to build something that lasts. The sun still rises over the Columbia River, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The land still stretches out in rolling hills, harsh and beautiful. The wind still blows across the sage, carrying the scent of summer heat and autumn rain. And somewhere in the air, if you listen carefully, you might still hear the echo of a woman's laughter, bright and unrestrained and full of joy, and a man's voice saying softly, "It is my favorite sound on earth." That is the story of Jacob and Maggie Calhoun, the cowboy and the teacher who found each other in Kennewick, Washington in 1883, and built a love that would last beyond their lifetimes. It is a story of courage and choice, of finding joy in hard places, of creating beauty from ordinary materials. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth learning from, because in the end, we are all just trying to do what they did. To find someone who loves us for exactly who we are, to build a life worth living, to leave the world a little better than we found it. To laugh freely and love deeply and face whatever comes with grace and courage, they showed that it was possible. Two ordinary people, finding each other at the right moment, making the choice to build something together. That is all it takes. That is everything it takes. And their laughter still echoes across the years, a reminder and an invitation. A reminder that joy is always possible. An invitation to live as fully, love as deeply, and laugh as freely as they did. That is their gift to us, their descendants both literal and spiritual. The knowledge that love like theirs is possible, that ordinary lives can be extraordinary, that laughter and joy are not frivolous but essential, that we all have the capacity to create something beautiful if we have the courage to try. The story ends, as all stories must. But the love at its center never dies. It lives on in every descendant, every person touched by their legacy, every soul inspired by their example. It lives on in the house Jacob built, and the school where Maggie taught, and the land they worked, and the family they created. It lives on in every person who reads their story and thinks, yes, that is how I want to love. That is the kind of life I want to build. It lives on in every laugh given freely, every risk taken for love, every ordinary moment transformed by presence and attention and joy. Jacob and Maggie Calhoun lived, loved, built, and died. But their story continues, rippling forward through time, touching lives they never knew, inspiring dreams they never imagined, creating possibility they never saw. And that, perhaps, is the truest form of immortality any of us can hope for. Not to be remembered for what we accomplished, but for how we loved. Not to be famous, but to be cherished. Not to change the world in dramatic fashion, but to make our corner of it a little brighter, a little kinder, a little more full of joy. They did that. Jacob and Maggie did that. And in doing so, they left a legacy worth far more than gold or fame. They left love, they left family, they left joy, they left hope, they left us their story, and in that story a roadmap for how to live well. Love deeply. Laugh freely. Build something that lasts. Face hardship with courage. Find joy wherever you can. Never apologize for who you are. Accept others as they are. Work hard. Dream big. Stay humble. Keep going even when it is hard. And always, always choose love. That was their secret. That was their gift. That is their legacy. And so the story comes to a close, but the love continues. The laughter echoes. The family grows. The ranch stands. The memory lives on. Jacob and Maggie Calhoun, together forever. Their love story complete and perfect in its way. a testament to what is possible when two people choose each other, and choose joy and choose to build a life together against all odds and through all challenges. Their favorite sound was each other's laughter. Their greatest achievement was their love. Their lasting legacy is the reminder that ordinary lives, lived with intention and love, are anything but ordinary. The end, and yet not the end at all, because love like theirs never truly ends. It simply transforms, continuing in new forms, touching new lives, creating new possibilities. And somewhere, on a hilltop overlooking the Columbia River, two spirits rest side by side, their work done, their love eternal, their story told and remembered and honored. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything,